I suppose it was when I found myself treading on the faces of the missing presumed dead that the full horror of the calamity pierced me to the quick. They were, for the most part, roughly, swiftly made photocopies, made from passports left behind at home that Tuesday, family snaps, holiday pictures, complete with dogs and children, wedding photos, after images of perished happiness, which only made it all worse. They'd been taped to lampposts, shop windows, letterboxes. Physically, that's what you did back then, didn't you, for a missing person? And in the gusts of wind, because while everybody tells you correctly how blue and sunny the 11th was, the weather changed quite quickly after that. Became quite autumnal, and in the gusts of wind that blew through the acrid smelling scrim of toxic mist that hung over downtown and midtown a week after the event, the images had blown clear of their moorings and carpeted the sidewalk, the curb, the gutters, the street, where they were run over by the tires of delivery trucks, the tread printing on the paper faces. My wife and I were taking our 2 teenage children to the theatre. Theatres had just reopened in that attempt to bring back something of life, of the ebullience of our great city in the face of distraught misery, fear, and trauma. Laughter therapy. If we'd promised our son, whose 15th birthday was 9 days after the catastrophe, that we'd take him to the stage production of Mel Brooks's The Producers, he still wanted to go, and why in the world would we deny him? The celebration was abnormal, of course. Supper was in a deserted midtown restaurant, but the theatre itself was packed with lost souls like ourselves. The hilarity was intense, desperate, infectious, very loud. A cocoon of comedy before exiting into the reality of tragedy, the most immense any of us had known since the end of the war. One of those lost faces was close to our family, the sister of one of our best friends, the aunt of our daughter's best friend. She'd babysat our 2 children when they were small on her hospitable lap, cuddled them, told them stories, shoved crumbly, fresh-baked cookies into their greedy mouths, and because she was an actress, sang to them, to us all, in fact. Par for the course in showbiz, even in New York, she had a line of work to tide her over between jobs on stage, teaching aspirant and actual business executives the best way to make a pitch, to deliver a report, to project themselves in a committee. Those seminars were once a month, and the place they were taught was the World Trade Center. It took months for Laura's remains to be identified. We thought her sister and brother-in-law would never get over the brutal cruelty of the loss, and I actually don't think they ever will. The second most piercing moment I remember, with the sharpest clarity in that time of monstrous misery, was in St. Thomas's Church in Midtown Manhattan, a service for the families of the 67 Britons killed in the mass murder of 9/11. Please use the words mass murder rather than the sanitized term terrorist attack, almost normalized by the grim presumptions of its recurrence. There's something abstractly dignifying, even academic, about those words, drawn as they are from the working vocabulary of political sociology. The service, as it happens, was organized by an old school and university friend of mine, Tom Harris, now Sir Thomas, then the Consul General, British Consul General in New York. The fact that Tom and I were both historians, he was actually a lot better than I was at school at that job, and we were both New Yorkers, somehow made the moment more acutely and bitterly personal. As you'd expect, the British families flown in were in a state of traumatized shock, grey with grief, profoundly bereaved. In the church, you wanted to put your arms round all of them, and many of us did, trying not to make the suffering more acute. The great and the good spoke feelingly, Bill Clinton, and then Prime Minister Tony Blair, who read from the bridge, Thornton Wilder's Bridge of San Luis Rey. There is a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridge between them is love, the only survival, the only meaning. I want to say that Tony Blair stayed and listened as long as the families wanted to talk to him. I'm no apologist for him, but there was no question that this moment profoundly shaped his life, as it did all of us who were there. 10 years ago, on the 10th anniversary, I kept being asked, Dan has alluded to this, inevitably prefaced with the words, none of us in the trade really want to hear, as an historian. So as an historian, did you realize at the time you were living through an historical moment? The obtuseness of the question, the redundancy, I suppose, to be a bit kinder, of course, is wholly understandable. I guess our job description presupposes somehow a recognition that selects events, states, happenings, especially mass murders, for inscription in the chronicle of the times, especially its formative moments. But this is to give an event like 9/11 a finite quality, to make it a chapter, as if it had a discernible origin, unfolding, and conclusion. Conclusion, the last being cliched, as if you could draw a line under it, since 9/11 is devoted, of course, to the opposite presumption. Drawing a line under this is the convenience of politicians. I guess it's what Joe Biden meant when he spoke about, in my view, vainly, of not fighting the wars of 20 years ago, but facing up to the challenges of the future as though those were separable. But we don't even need the appalling restoration of the mass murder enablers, the Taliban, along with the appointment of a senior al-Qaeda figure, Sirajuddin Haqqani, most wanted man by the FBI, a terrorist, as Afghanistan's Minister of Defense and Security, the definition of a dark, lethal joke. Nor do we need the steady drumbeat of homicidal atrocities, 7/7, Manchester, Boston, Bataclan, Nice, to make us understand that any clean separation of 2001 and 2021 is utterly artificial and delusional. Much of history, my dear friends, never ends. The present is imbricated with the past. But the refusal of the Taliban or the consequences of 9/11 to lie down and be interred with a particular historical moment shocks us. Perhaps because it seems to go against the grain of Western history, which is so often assumed to be linear. And the main line of narratives since the 18th century Enlightenment, a progression from tyranny, bigotry, destitution, sickness, and ignorance towards liberty, toleration, material well-being, health, and knowledge based on reason, on scientifically grounded logic. Once upon a time, not so long ago, we fondly imagined that the coming of the internet would actually make all those desirable ends come true. But what the 21st century, beginning with 9/11, has taught us, that this turns out to be a species of higher digital fairy tale. What the internet, social media, has actually produced, to a shocking extent, is the perpetuation, even the rejuvenation, of tyranny, bigotry, conspiracy, the appeal of belief over knowledge, and not least, and this is the honourable concern of since 9/11, newly brutal forms of intolerance, an allergy to cultural pluralism, which goes all the way from politicians in power, the demagogic coiners of a zero-sum game between citizens of somewhere and citizens of nowhere, all the way from them to the fanatics of ISIS and Taliban. The hideous debacle of the past month, or so we should call it by its name, that the choice in Afghanistan was between a surge of another 100,000 troops committed to a forever war or the abrupt and irrevocable exit that we've just witnessed, means that whatever we feel about it, any use of military or physical power to contain or withstand armed fanaticism has in fact been abandoned. But the fight by other means, dear friends, the means that free societies, obstinately committed to free thought and expression, to the liberating power of education, to the equality of the sexes, the coexistence of religions and races, so many different ones of which were represented among those who were murdered on 9/11. Those very values that for all American problems were indeed embodied in those who worked downtown in Manhattan that terrible Tuesday. The fight of the uncensored voice and pen must go on, not only unbowed by this disaster, but be taken by whatever means to the bigots and the despots. For you don't need an old historian to tell you that while not all tyrannies are theocracies, all theocracies of whatever religion are tyrannies. All regimes that criminalize what they declare to be sins are detestable tyrannies. And tyrannies, moreover, that however we might rationalize the present moment as just about Afghanistan, will not, I promise you, rest within the borders of that tormented country. We may leave them alone. They will not grant us the same luxury. Right now, the tyrants are unafraid of our hard power. That is what we have come to. But a whole generation of educated women and men, especially women, whose free agency they are for whatever the public relations of the moment, whose free agency they are bent and destroying, will, I am convinced in the end, not be imprisoned once again and forever within their dark, bleak, life-shriveled dogma. Knowledge and its liberation, as since 9/11 knows, is not, in fact, soft power at all. Its message is more deadly to the tyrants than missiles. And one day, trust this historian, it will prevail.